To all law enforcement and the lawyers, the court, the jury, everyone that had to see all this. And I'm very sorry that this evil's had to come into their life too. And they loved him. They loved him so much. They loved all of us. This has impacted my kids, and for that I will never be able to forgive.
Robbed of having my father walk me down the aisle. And Lisa, my last mother on earth, was taken away.
The house that bled. He left the water running to wash away the blood, but the water turned red. On November 28th, 2016, a Knoxville police officer stepped into a quiet, two-story home on Golden View Lane, a suburban house like any other, tucked inside a peaceful Tennessee neighborhood. But inside, the air was warm, humid, and thick with an unmistakable stench. The officer moved slowly, hand on his weapon. The front door had been locked from the inside. Lights were still on. Groceries sat untouched in the foyer, but no one answered. In the bathroom, water was overflowing from the tub, soaking the floors. A chemical scent clung to the air. Bleach, acid. It burned the nose. And then came the moment no one could ever unsee. Inside a blue plastic container, in the master bathroom, submerged in a corrosive stew of liquid chemicals, were human body parts. Arms, legs, dissolving slowly. This wasn't just a murder. This was a carefully choreographed ritual of destruction, not committed by a stranger, not a thief, not even an enemy, but their own son. Joel Guy Jr. was 28 years old. He had never held a job, never paid a bill, never cooked his own meals. He was, by all accounts, a recluse, tall, pale, with unkempt hair, dark-rimmed glasses, and an awkward presence. He lived alone in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, attending LSU part-time as a student, but most of his days were spent online, alone in his apartment, while his parents, Joel Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy, paid for everything. Friends of the family had always found Joel Jr. odd. He rarely spoke at family gatherings. He didn't make eye contact, and even his sisters described him as distant, cold, and hard to understand. But Lisa, a sweet, soft-spoken woman who worked in human resources, loved her son deeply. She called him her baby. She made excuses for his isolation, saying he was just shy. Joel Sr., a muscular man with a booming laugh and work-hardened hands, was less sentimental. But he, too, continued to support his only son financially, even well into adulthood. But that support was about to end.
They had both said, but Lisa said that Joel Michael was going to have to find a job because they only had a certain amount of money. The retirement they had taken out his pension, and I'm not sure if that's the name of it, but they only had a certain amount to live on, and they would not be able to afford Joel Michael or paying for his apartment.
Okay.
Things like that.
And on Thanksgiving, what did your dad say to you?
You could, there was a little bit of tension, and so when everyone was inside and it was just...
I'm sorry? I'm sorry.
It was just me and Dad and myself. That was bad grammar. It was just me and Dad. We were out on the porch, and he said that Lisa hadn't told Joel Michael, and that you could feel like that was what was causing the little bit of tension inside the house. That you could feel the tension. It was a little bit.
Did he say anything specifically about them withdrawing financial support from your brother?
That's what he said. He had told Joel Michael about that they had told Joel Michael about him having to get a job or being cut off, but he didn't. I can't remember his correct verbiage, but it wasn't cut off. It's that they couldn't afford to
support him
any longer.
Okay.
In late 2016, the guys announced their retirement. They were selling the house, downsizing, cutting expenses, and most importantly, they told Joel Jr. they would be ending the monthly payments that supported his lifestyle. No more rent money, no more tuition, no more allowance. They were going to let him go. The last family gathering took place over Thanksgiving weekend. Joel Jr. drove up from Baton Rouge to Knoxville. The family, including his 3 sisters, spent the holiday eating, laughing, talking about the future. It was supposed to be a warm farewell before Joel Lesar and Lisa Guy moved on to the next chapter of their lives. But Joel Jr. had a very different plan. He arrived in town 3 days early, and he brought with him a murder kit. After Thanksgiving dinner, the sisters left. Joel Jr. stayed behind to spend a few more days with his parents. According to investigators, the killings occurred on Saturday, November 26th. Lisa Guy was scheduled to return to work that Monday. When she didn't show up and didn't answer her phone, her worried co-workers contacted police. That's what led officers to the house, to the groceries by the door, to the hot water still running in the tub, and to something far worse. Joel Lesar's dismembered torso was found in the upstairs bedroom, stabbed over 40 times. He had fought back, fiercely, but was ultimately overpowered. Muscle was stripped from bone. Knife wounds punctured the walls. Blood soaked the mattress, the carpets, the door frame. Lisa was found in the exercise room. She had been stabbed 31 times. Her head was removed. Her hands had been severed, and her remains were transported, piece by piece, to the bathroom upstairs, where they were being dissolved in plastic bins filled with corrosive chemicals. Joel Jr. had tried to create a homemade acid bath. In the kitchen, a large stock pot sat on the stove. Inside it, investigators made a chilling discovery: Lisa Guy's severed head, boiling. But it wasn't just the brutality that shook police to their core. It was the precision. He had written everything down in a notebook found in Joel Jr.'s backpack. Left in the house was a step-by-step plan, titled in his handwriting, chillingly straightforward. Get killing knives. Quiet. Multiple. Drench kill room master bath to destroy forensic evidence. Flush chunks down toilet. Body gives time of death. Remove her hands. Use gloves. Leave nothing behind. There were detailed lists: which chemicals to use, where to buy the knives, how to disable surveillance cameras, even reminders to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. One bullet point read, "He's not alive to claim her half of the insurance. All mine. $500. 0. Joel Jr. had turned the house into a kill zone, a butcher's workshop designed not just to end life, but to erase it. But there was one thing he hadn't planned for. He injured himself. Badly. While attacking his father, Joel Jr. had cut his left hand open, deep to the bone. He was bleeding heavily, leaving blood trails throughout the house. Surveillance footage from a local Walmart captured him just hours later, walking through the aisles with his hand crudely bandaged, buying first aid supplies and rubbing alcohol. But instead of returning to the crime scene, he fled. When police arrived, he was already back in Baton Rouge, attempting to tend to his injuries, unaware that his private notebook, his chilling timeline, and his DNA were sitting inside the murder house, waiting to tell the story. The house on Golden View Lane was no longer a home. It was a monument to madness, and the man behind it all was still free. The notebook. This was no rage killing. This was a blueprint. In most murder investigations, detectives struggle to reconstruct motive. They pore over texts, computer histories, financial records, trying to piece together the why. But inside the Guy residence, investigators didn't have to guess. The killer had written it all down. In the clutter of Joel Jr. As belongings, left carelessly in an upstairs room, sat a spiral-bound notebook. It was college-ruled, the kind sold in any back-to-school aisle. But inside, it read like a serial killer's diary. Not emotional, not poetic, methodical, cold, detailed. The first page began with a list of supplies. Heater, bleach, plastic bin for body, lye, gloves, bug knife, sledgehammer, food-grade hydrogen peroxide, drain opener. It continued with plans written like instructions from a manual. Kill them. Turn heater up as high as it goes to speed decomposition. Spray walls and surfaces with bleach. Remove identifying body parts. But what chilled the blood of every officer in that room was the casual tone, as if he was taking notes for a class. Murder 101. Get Lisa to come home. Kill her first, then kill Joel SR. To get him out of the way, use knife. He's big and strong. She's smaller. Then need one final incentive. Money. $500,000. Life insurance. All mine if they're both dead. Joel Jr. hadn't snapped. He hadn't lost control. He had plotted this for months. In fact, he had come home earlier than planned, arriving in Knoxville on Tuesday, November 22nd, 5 days before the murders, so he could hide his tools, scope the layout of the house, and prepare his trap. He watched his family give thanks, ate with them, laughed with them, hugged them goodnight, knowing he would slaughter them days later. As the forensics team moved through the house, it became clear this was not just murder. It was transformation, from son to predator. The plastic bins were labeled. One contained Lisa's torso, another held limbs. The heating had been turned up to nearly 90 F. Joel Jr. had intended to speed up decomposition to destroy time of death estimates. He had written reminders: douse with drain opener to destroy fingerprints, use hot water to melt tissues. But nothing went according to plan. The fight with his father had been brutal. Joel SR had suffered over 40 stab wounds. Blood had pooled and sprayed across the room, evidence impossible to clean. Joel Jr. had left his own DNA everywhere. There were bloody footprints in the carpet, a bloody handprint on the bathroom wall, and in a final stroke of irony, the very thing he thought would protect him exposed everything. The notebook. He had written it for himself, to stay focused. But in doing so, he documented every step of the crime. It was a confession in plain sight. And when police traced his location, using cell phone pings and receipts, they realized he had already returned to Louisiana. The man who had butchered his own parents was now bleeding alone in his apartment. Authorities in Baton Rouge were notified immediately. A SWAT team moved in fast. When they arrived at Joel Jr.'s apartment, the lights were off. The building was silent. Officers feared a suicide. That maybe, faced with the unraveling of his plan, he had taken his own life. But inside, he was alive, sitting alone, his hand heavily bandaged, surrounded by unopened food containers, notebooks, books on chemistry, anatomy, and obscure forensic science. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he said almost nothing. As he was led out of his apartment in handcuffs, neighbors watched from behind curtains, stunned. To them, Joel Jr. had always been quiet, a little strange, yes, but polite, unassuming, a loner, not the kind of man who would plan the dismemberment of his own mother or boil her head on the stove. Back in Knoxville, the family was crumbling. Joel SR and Lisa's daughters, Joel Jr., as sisters, were inconsolable. They had seen their brother just days earlier, shared a meal, took photos. Not once did they suspect that their own flesh and blood was harboring murderous intent. At the funeral, their tears weren't just for the parents they lost, but for the brother who had become something else entirely. This was evil, one of the sisters later said in court. Not mental illness, not desperation, evil. And now, prosecutors were building the case. But in truth, they already had everything they needed. The bodies, the DNA, the surveillance footage, and the notebook. A chilling glimpse into the mind of a son who saw his family not as people, but as obstacles to be erased. The trial of a ghost. He sat still, motionless, like he wasn't really there. Not grieving, not angry, just gone. It was September 2020, nearly 4 years after the murders, when Joel Guy Jr. finally walked into a Tennessee courtroom to stand trial for the brutal double homicide of his parents. The nation was reeling from the chaos of a pandemic, but inside the courtroom, all eyes were locked on the man accused of dismembering his own mother and cooking her remains. He entered in a muted button-down shirt, shackled, expressionless. His hair was shorter now, his body thinner, but the cold emptiness in his eyes, that same haunting vacancy detectives had seen for years earlier, was unchanged. The courtroom was quiet, almost too quiet, because no one knew what to expect. Would he confess? Would he show remorse? Or would he finally reveal why? The prosecution wasted no time. In opening statements, they described a murder so violent, so calculated, it left even seasoned officers shaken. The prosecutor stepped forward and faced the jury. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was planned, documented, practiced. This was evil written down in his own hand. They brought in the notebook, itemized, time-stamped, cataloged. The pages were enlarged for the jury to see. Jurors flinched as words like dissolved torso, flush chunks, and insurance money were read aloud. The courtroom darkened as they played surveillance footage from Walmart. Joel Jr., just hours after the killings, walking calmly through the store, buying hydrogen peroxide, acid, and burn cream for his wounded hand. Then they showed the photos, room by room, the mutilated bodies, the chemical bins, the pot on the stove. One juror turned away, hand over her mouth. Another cried. The judge paused court. Even the most hardened viewers could barely process it. But the defense had very little to offer. They didn't deny that Joel Jr. had committed the murders. They didn't present an alibi. They didn't call character witnesses. Their entire argument hinged on a single idea. He wasn't in his right mind. They suggested he had suffered a psychotic break, that he was a mentally ill recluse, overwhelmed by the fear of abandonment, losing the financial support of his parents, losing the only stability he'd ever known. But prosecutors dismantled it piece by piece. They pointed to the planning, not ours, months. They found internet searches going back weeks, purchase histories for corrosive chemicals, a detailed budget of expenses for the murder, as if he was planning a home renovation, not a homicide. And the notebook didn't read like the ramblings of a delusional man. It read like a contract. Joel Jr. never took the stand. He never looked at his sisters, never spoke to the courtroom. But those who were there described something even more unnerving than rage or remorse. They described absence. He wasn't emotional. One reporter later recalled, he wasn't cold. He was just blank. Like he wasn't even experiencing the trial. During the reading of graphic testimony, he sat quietly, hands folded. When the prosecution described his mother's remains boiling on the stove, he blinked once. But perhaps the most haunting moment came during closing arguments, when the prosecutor turned to the jury and asked, what kind of man plans the death of his own mother and sets a reminder to bring her back from work early so she can die first? Then came the silence, the unbearable kind, the kind that only comes when everyone in the room realizes they've seen something inhuman. After 3 days of testimony and only a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. To counts of first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, felony murder, felony theft. Joel Guy Jr. didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't speak, and when asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he declined. The judge imposed the maximum, life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even as the gavel came down, even as justice was handed out, there was a feeling that something hadn't been resolved. Because Joel Jr. never answered the question that haunted everyone. Why? His sisters left the courtroom in tears. Not just because their parents were gone, but because their brother, the boy they grew up with, the quiet child in the corner of family photos, had turned into a stranger. One sister later told reporters, "We didn't just lose our parents, we lost him, too. The person he became doesn't exist in our world anymore." But had he ever? That's the question that would linger in their minds long after the cameras left. Inside apartment 11, it looked ordinary, quiet, clean, but inside, it was like walking into the mind of someone who had already disappeared from reality. After Joel Guy Jr. was arrested in Baton Rouge, investigators obtained a warrant to search his one-bedroom apartment on Baton Rouge Drive. Apartment 11. The building was unremarkable, tucked among a row of similar complexes housing students and low-income tenants. Neighbors described Joel Jr. the same way: polite, soft-spoken, invisible. He rarely left. He didn't bring friends home. Packages arrived frequently, mostly chemicals, books, tools. No one paid attention. But when detectives stepped inside apartment 11, what they found wasn't a college student's living space. It was a bunker, a laboratory, a quiet temple of obsession. The walls were bare, the windows covered with thick curtains, blocking out all sunlight. There were stacks of plastic containers, neatly labeled, with everything from knives to rope to first aid kits. On the kitchen counter sat a whiteboard filled with notes. Most disturbing were the diagrams, body anatomy sketches, muscle group breakdowns, handwritten notes like, "Tissue melts at prolonged temp. Use boiling method. Bleach can destroy DNA, but not if diluted." Books lined the shelves, forensics for dummies, the chemistry of crime scene cleanup, and several texts on decomposition, thermodynamics, and pathology. But this wasn't curiosity. This wasn't academic. This was preparation. In one drawer, police found practice knives, sharpened, clean, but worn, as if they had been used on something over and over. In another, a printed map of his parents' neighborhood in Knoxville, highlighted routes, time notations, doodles and margin notes like, "Cut power here, garbage collection day plan around." It was a level of detail that stunned even experienced detectives. He wasn't improvising. One said, he rehearsed. Then came the final reveal. On the floor beside the bed was a second notebook, almost identical to the one left at the crime scene. Inside, he had logged weeks of preparation. Baidu X drain opener, test on meat, turn up thermostat before leaving, speed rod, claim. I hadn't seen them since Thanksgiving. The most chilling line was scrawled near the bottom of a page dated November 10th. "They're not people, they're problems." Police were speechless. This wasn't the diary of someone in crisis. This was the manifesto of someone who had already removed himself from the realm of human empathy. Someone who viewed murder as logistics, as a solution, as a means to an end. Yet for all his preparation, Joel Jr. made fatal mistakes. His injury, the abandoned notebook, the Walmart cameras. He hadn't anticipated imperfection, the messiness of violence, the unpredictability of real life. He had believed, somehow, that he could calculate everything, control everything, even death. But death, like guilt, has a way of leaking through the cracks. Back in Knoxville, the family's surviving daughters began the heartbreaking process of clearing out their parents' home. The carpet was torn up. The floors were stained. The smell of bleach lingered for months. They kept what little they could. A photo album, a wedding ring, a handwritten recipe. Everything else was soaked in blood. In a later interview, one sister said, "I still remember the house the way it was when we were kids. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Not the way he left it, but the images were hard to shake. The plastic bins, the boiling pot, the room where their parents had fought for their lives, against their own son." Even Joel Jr., as former classmates began to speak out, one recalled him from a single semester at LSU. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was always weird. Dark stuff. He asked a question once about how long it would take a human body to dissolve in acid. Everyone thought he was just being creepy. Now I wonder if it was a warning. Others remembered his obsession with anatomy, how he'd sit alone, hunch over diagrams of the human form, tracing veins and muscles with his finger. Not like a student learning, more like a butcher choosing cuts. Joel Guy Jr. wasn't insane. He was invisible, and that might have been even worse. A mother's love. She knew something was wrong, but she loved him too much to believe it. Lisa Guy had a warm smile, soft eyes, and a gentleness that everyone described the same way: maternal, comforting, safe. She worked in human resources and had spent her life helping others. Always the first to listen, the last to judge. Her coworkers adored her. Her church group trusted her. Her daughters called her their best friend. But perhaps the most telling tale of Lisa's life was the way she loved her son, even when it hurt her. Joel Guy Jr. was Lisa's only boy, her youngest, her baby. She protected him fiercely. She made his meals, paid his rent, and drove hours to visit him in Baton Rouge when he seemed lonely. And even as he grew into adulthood, a strange, isolated man with few social ties, she never gave up on him. Joel Jr. hadn't held a job. He didn't drive. He spent years enrolled in college, changing majors, never finishing anything. But Lisa kept sending money, covering tuition, buying his groceries. Friends told her he needed to grow up. Lisa didn't argue. She just smiled. "He'll get there," she'd say. "He just needs more time." In the fall of 2016, everything changed. Lisa and Joel S.R. had been planning for retirement. They were selling the house, moving to a smaller place, and most importantly, they had decided to stop financially supporting their adult son. It wasn't cruel. It was necessary. They had told him gently, sat him down, explained that they had to think about their own future now. They were in their late 50s. They'd worked hard. It was time to rest. Joel Jr. didn't argue, at least, not to their faces. But Lisa's closest friends would later say something that still haunts them. She was worried. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Lisa told a coworker that Joel Jr. had been acting off on the phone, quiet, strained, as if he was holding something back. She brushed it off, said he was probably just overwhelmed. "He's not angry," she insisted, "just distant." But she couldn't shake the feeling. So she did what mothers do. She invited him home. Thanksgiving 2016 was supposed to be their last big holiday in the Knoxville house. All the daughters came. There were hugs, turkey, laughs around the dinner table, family photos, the last ones ever taken. Lisa made extra food, just for Joel Jr. He barely touched it. He sat at the table, silent, watching, not smiling, not joking like the rest. When his sisters hugged their parents goodbye, he lingered behind, the only one staying through the weekend. Lisa smiled. "It's good," she told a friend in a text. We'll have some quiet time with him before the move. But that quiet would become silence. Saturday, November 26th. Investigators later reconstructed the timeline from surveillance footage and forensic evidence. Lisa had left the house that morning to buy groceries. There were receipts timestamped 12:15 p.m. In her car, bags of food, a rotisserie chicken, a gallon of milk, toilet paper, still sealed. She had just walked through the front door when the attack happened. According to the autopsy, she was stabbed from behind. Defensive wounds showed she fought, tried to turn around, but was overpowered quickly. Joel Jr. had waited until she was alone. He had written it in his notes. Kill Lisa first. She's easy. Quick, get her out of the way. The groceries spilled onto the floor, still packed. The rotisserie chicken lay on its side, unopened. The timestamp on the receipt, 12:15. Time of death, shortly after 12:30 p.m. Her co-workers tried calling her the Monday morning when she didn't show up to work. They never got an answer. Later, during the trial, one of Lisa's daughters sobbed on the witness stand. She would have forgiven him, even if he'd just asked for help. Money, food, anything, she would have given it. She loved him. She always did. That's what hurt the most. Not just the brutality, but the betrayal. Lisa had given everything to the boy she raised. She defended him when others judged him. She saw the best in him when no one else could. And in return, he took her life with a knife he bought 3 days earlier from the local Walmart. Today, Lisa's memory lives on in her daughters, who speak often of her warmth, her kindness, her unfailing hope in people. Even in her killer, one of them said, "I wish I could say she didn't see it coming, but deep down, I think she did. She just loved him too much to believe it." What he left behind. There were no goodbye notes, no explanations, just blood and silence. When the murders were first discovered, the world struggled to understand how a son could do this to his parents. But the deeper question, the one that never stopped echoing, was why? Why not walk away? Why not cut ties? Disappear? Start over? Why this? The answer, authorities believed, was devastating in its simplicity. Joel Guy Jr. didn't want freedom. He wanted everything. In the spiral notebook left behind, sandwiched between shopping lists and kill instructions, were chilling fragments of logic, sentences that peeled back the curtain on his mind. He's not alive to claim her half of the insurance. Money all mine. No evidence left. Perfect crime equals new life. In his eyes, murder wasn't a last resort. It was a shortcut, a solution, a means to an end. He didn't intend to disappear into hiding. He wasn't planning to flee the country. He was planning to inherit. Joel Jr. knew his parents had life insurance, about $500. Zero. He believed, falsely, that if both of them died without a will, he, as their only son, would claim it all. What he didn't realize is that murderers can't inherit. There's a legal doctrine, the Slayer rule, that prevents anyone from profiting from the death of someone they kill. But Joel Jr. had either never learned that or didn't care. He saw the insurance money as a guarantee, a reward. When police searched his laptop, they found hours of research, not just about chemicals or decomposition, but banking procedures, death benefit claims, how to access accounts, how long insurance investigations typically take. He had already drafted a message he planned to send from a fake email account. "Hello, my parents recently passed away. I am the only surviving relative. I'd like to discuss their policy." It'd read like something you'd write after a traffic accident, not after you stabbed your own mother 31 times and boiled her head on a stove. The investigators also found lists of things Joel Jr. planned to buy after the murders: a new laptop, a gaming system, high-end cooking tools. It was surreal, like reading the notes of someone planning a shopping trip, not the aftermath of a double homicide. One detective later said, "He planned the murders more carefully than he planned what came next. It's like he thought once they were gone, life would just restart, as if nothing had happened. But reality had other plans. The crime scene never fully decayed. Not in memory. The house at 11,430 for Golden View Lane stood empty for months. Neighbors refused to walk past it. One local realtor said, "We had to tell potential buyers what happened there." Most of them walked out before the tour ended. Eventually, the house was gutted, renovated, the walls repainted, the carpets replaced. But the past has a way of bleeding through fresh paint. Forensic technicians still remember the smell, the heat, the bizarre decision to turn up the thermostat, accelerating rot, like he was trying to erase time itself. He left candles burning in the bathroom, hot water running in the tub, as if some part of him wanted to purify the scene. But there is no cleansing this kind of horror. As the years passed, Joel Guy Jr. faded from headlines, locked away at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tiptonville, Tennessee. He remains a quiet inmate. No outbursts, no interviews, no apologies. One prison staffer said he rarely speaks. He reads, writes, stares at walls. He's just there, serving to life sentences in a cinder block box that he built for himself long before the murders. Because the truth is, Joel Jr. died long before his parents did, and what was left behind was something else entirely. There are no photos of Joel Sr. and Lisa Guy in their final moments, just fragments, grocery bags, spilled milk, a Thanksgiving photo taken 2 days before the murders. But those who knew them remember the joy, the laughter, the love they gave freely, even to the one who took everything from them. They didn't deserve what happened, one family friend said, but if love could have saved them, they would have lived forever. The final question. He didn't kill out of hate. He didn't kill in anger. He killed because it was useful. By the time Joel Guy Jr. was sentenced, the story had already become legend, whispered in true crime forums, dissected in courtrooms, and burned into the memories of all who followed the case. But after the media left, after the trial ended, and after the house on Golden View Lane was emptied, there was one question that refused to die. Was Joel Guy Jr. born this way or made this way? The human mind aches for answers, for reason. We want killers to be monsters, foreign, distant, inhuman. But Joel wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a stranger in the night. He was their son. He grew up in a stable home, to loving parents, a middle-class life. No history of abuse, no record of trauma, no drugs, no alcohol. His sisters described a quiet kid, a bit awkward, not social, but never violent. Yet somewhere between childhood and adulthood, something fractured, and no one noticed. Psychologists who studied the case later speculated on several possibilities: narcissistic personality disorder, high-functioning psychopathy, extreme social detachment. But none of those could fully explain what he became, because even the coldest diagnoses don't usually come with butcher knives and boiling flesh. Joel Guy Jr. wasn't just distant. He was absent, emotionally detached, morally hollow, intellectually mechanical. His notebook didn't include a single word of hesitation. No what if, no should I. Just do it, burn it, move on. One prosecutor called him a ghost wearing a human suit. His trial attorneys described trying to speak with him as like talking to a spreadsheet. But the most haunting insight came from one of his sisters. In a quiet moment, outside the courtroom, where no cameras rolled, he was always watching us, even as kids, like he was studying us, not part of us. She said there were times she wondered if he cared about anything. Now she knew the answer. In the years since his conviction, Joel Guy Jr. has refused every interview, no TV appearances, no letters, no phone calls. In a world addicted to killers who explain themselves, to Ted Bundys and Dahmers who confess, write books, seek redemption, Joel Jr. is a void. He said nothing in his defense, nothing in apology, nothing to the people whose lives he shattered. He simply vanished behind prison walls. And maybe that's the truest version of him there ever was. An empty seat at the family table, a shadow in the corner of the room, a son who was never really there. The Guy daughters live on, strong, grieving, rebuilding. They speak at memorial events for their parents. They light candles. They share memories. But they also carry something else, the weight of a story that doesn't have a satisfying ending. Because the truth is, evil doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes, it looks like indifference. Like a son returning home with a smile and a knife in his suitcase. So we're left with the final question. Could anyone have stopped him? If someone had seen the signs? If someone had intervened? If someone had forced him to live like an adult sooner? Would Lisa and Joel still be alive? Or was it always going to end this way? Not with a bang, but with a slow, silent erasure of empathy, of connection, of family. A son fading into something unrecognizable, something terrifying. And that is the case of Joel and Lisa Guy. A story of love so unconditional, it never saw the blade coming. A story of a family that gave everything to the one person who saw them as nothing more than a means to an end. The house on Golden View Lane is empty now, but its walls remember. And somewhere, in a prison cell far away, the man who made it bleed sits in silence, alone, unrepentant, and unreadable, forever.